Welcome back, friends, to another session of fluid mechanics and rate processes. In the last session, we looked at how a viscous flow at large Reynolds number could actually be broken up into two parts: a boundary layer which is close to the surface of the body, where all the viscous effects are accounted for, and then away from the boundary layer, we could actually call that as an outer flow. And the idea was that here the viscous forces are not important at all and viscous effects can be neglected. So, that is how we can simplify a viscous flow. So, one can now look at two aspects of these real flows. One, a boundary layer flow close to the body, and then an inviscid flow away from the body. So, we are going to spend the remaining part of the semester in understanding these concepts. So, today I want to talk about the inviscid part of the flow. These flows essentially imply that the viscosity is 0. So, mu is 0, that is what inviscid flow is, and these are usually governed by Euler equations. Just to refresh your memory, these are again two sets of equations: the mass balance, wherein divergence of velocity field is 0, and then we had the momentum equation, where we have the unsteady term, then the convective acceleration, and then the pressure gradient, and this now is equal to the body force, because we do not have to worry about the viscous term. And we made a comment that even though these equations are one order lower, so these are first order in V, unlike the viscous flow equations. So, maybe I should write here, unlike viscous equations, that are second order in velocity. Okay. So, this is good news, but the problem is that they are still nonlinear. So, we still have to deal with this term, which causes some difficulty in getting solutions. And a fallout of the nonlinearity is that we cannot superpose flows. I am going to say a little bit more about this when we go to flows where one can superpose and where one has linear equations. So, we will hold on the discussion till that point. So, what can we do further? It turns out, and we are going to see, that if the flow is irrotational, and that is an if, then further simplification is possible. So, now obviously we would like to understand when are the flows irrotational. We have talked a little bit about it, so we are going to review that. And what if the flows are irrotational? Then how do we further simplify these equations? I can already tell you the answer, so that you can comprehend what we are going to discuss. It turns out, if you have an irrotational flow, then the velocity field can be expressed as the gradient of a scalar, which we call as a potential. And then beautifully what happens, that this equation, which seems to have 4 unknowns right now, 3 velocities and pressure, and they are coupled, if we had an inviscid flow which is additionally irrotational, and a couple of other conditions. Then I could decouple velocity and pressure. So, I would get an equation simply in terms of the potential, okay? And that would be a linear equation, and I can use that to get the velocity field and then use the Bernoulli's equation to get the pressure field. Okay? So, the simplification becomes enormous. Instead of having 4 coupled unknowns, I am reduced to just one single scalar, the velocity potential. Okay? And then I can also superpose flows, in the sense that if I have building blocks of certain flows, I can construct more complex flows by combining them. So, all this we are going to see. So, the next concept that we want to talk about is irrotational flows. We have already discussed this when we did the flow kinematics, but let me recollect your thoughts. So, kindly recall that if I talk about the gradient of velocity, okay. So, I have a velocity field and gradient tells me how it is varying in different directions. This we said we could decompose into a symmetric part. So, there was a gradient of V plus a gradient of V transpose. So, this is the symmetric part, and then there is another part which is the skew symmetric part, which is gradient of V minus gradient of V transpose. So, this is the skew symmetric part, right. And what we were able to argue and show is that the symmetric part is actually the one which relates to the strain rate, and for a Newtonian fluid we were able to relate the strain rate tensor to the stress tensor. Okay. So, if you recall, we said that for a Newtonian fluid the stress, basically tau, was something like minus P. So, that is the hydrostatic pressure, and then mu times the strain rate, 2 mu, in fact there was a factor of 2, twice of mu times the coefficient of viscosity times the strain rate. So, this includes the, what does the strain rate include? From the kinematics we recall this includes the dilatation, right. It also includes the shear. So, all these are rate, and of course, the extension. This was the symmetric part. The skew symmetric part was related to omega, which essentially is the angular velocity of a fluid element. So, we were able to work out that the skew symmetric part, by definition the diagonal elements are 0 and the off diagonal terms are non-zero, but then they are kind of related to each other through a negative sign. Okay. So, there are only 3 non-zero or 3 unique components that we can find in this matrix, and they were related to the angular velocity. And in fact, we were able to show that omega is actually in fact half of omega gives rise to the rotation rate, and this omega was curl of velocity. Okay. So, let me now recap the whole thing for you. I have a velocity field, and from kinematics I have been able to break it into 2 parts, a symmetric and a skew symmetric. The symmetric part gives me what would be useful in a constitutive model, the strain rate tensor, and the skew symmetric part tells me how these elements are spinning about their own axis, and the rate of rotation is omega, and this omega is also related to the curl of velocity, which we are denoting by the small omega, and there is a relationship between the angular speed and the curl of velocity. This we already know. We had also discussed in fair detail what is meant by this rotation rate and what would happen if this is 0 everywhere. So, we had proposed that if omega is 0 everywhere, then we have something called an irrotational flow. So, there are two ways of checking irrotationality. One is you could go and check the angular spin rate of each element about its own axis, or you could simply look at the vorticity, the curl of the velocity. If the curl of velocity is 0 everywhere in the flow, then you have a irrotational flow. So, this also implies curl of velocity is 0 everywhere. Let me just refresh your memory with some of the examples that we had talked about. So, in 2D, if you remember, my omega is simply omega z times k. Okay? So, if I have a two-dimensional plane, then the vorticity vector is actually can be represented by simply a scalar, and if this is my plane, then it points outward in the k direction. How is that given? So, omega z, if you remember, was actually del V y by del x minus del V x by del y. Okay. So, we also looked at some examples that what does omega z equal to 0 imply. Okay. And the example that we gave was that if I have circular streamlines, then it does not necessarily mean that omega z is non-zero. Okay. So, so let me then just remind you that I will take two examples. So, first is, does streamlines being circular imply omega z is not equal to 0? That is one question that we addressed. And the second question that we want to ask is that can straight streamlines lead to omega z equal to 0, right. So, this would help us understand what is rotationality or irrotationality. So, let us first take example 1. Okay. So, I want to take circular streamlines and then try to argue that under what conditions you would get a rotational versus irrotational flow. So, I will draw two sets of streamlines. So, these are my streamlines, okay, kind of circular, and let us say this is the direction of the flow. For simplicity, let me talk about a steady flow. Okay, so, it does not change with time. Simply by drawing these streamlines, can I conclude that this flow is rotational or irrotational? The answer is no, okay, and as I will illustrate. So, it really depends on the fluid element. So, let me give an example of a free vortex versus a forced vortex. In a forced vortex, I am going to have a velocity field where Vr is 0 and V theta is k r. What that means is that there is no radial speed, so there is only a tangential speed, and it varies linearly with increasing r. Okay, so it is almost like a rigid body motion. And here what is happening is that if I draw fluid elements, which you can, at these different locations, then what I need to ask myself is that when this fluid element moves as a rigid body, does it rotate about its axis? And in fact, you can check from this velocity field that actually, because it's a rigid body motion, so the element goes like this. Okay? So it actually, when it does one revolution around the central axis, it also does a rotation about its own axis. So let me just indicate that with an arrow. So let me say this is the orientation of the element at this location, and then what I would find is that this element actually goes like this, then it actually goes like this, and further it goes like this. Okay. So again, to show you, the element would be doing this. Okay. So it is actually spinning about its axis as it rotates. This flow would be a rotational flow. It is a vortex because my fluid elements are doing some kind of a revolution about a central axis. Okay, so that's what a vortex is. You would have some kind of closed streamlines. They need not be circular, they could be elliptic, but the fluid element makes some rotation about a central axis. How about a free vortex? For a free vortex, an example is the radial speed is 0 and V theta could be something like k by r. So I am not arguing this for you how the fluid elements would behave from this speed. You can check that by working it out. But the effect of this velocity field would be the following, that if I consider a fluid element as it goes around, you would see that with this velocity field it does this, in the sense that the fluid element does a revolution about the central axis, but it does not spin about its own axis. So just for completeness, let me draw the arrowheads here. So what you would then find out is that an element which is oriented like this would actually keep getting oriented in the same manner at all locations. And this would be an example of irrotational flow. Okay. So that answers the first question. So remember, we had asked ourselves two questions. The first question is, if the streamlines are circular, does it automatically imply that my flow is rotational? And I have already given you a counter example that no, it does not. Both are circular streamlines. The force vortex is rotational and the free vortex is irrotational. Okay? And as I told you earlier in the session, that if you had an inviscid flow with an irrotationality condition, it would actually help us in the analysis. Okay? Now we come to the second question. If I have straight streamlines, am I guaranteed that omega z is 0? That means it is a irrotational flow. So let's try to answer that. Okay, so now we are going to ask ourselves the second question: what if streamlines are straight? And here I would like to give you the example of the plane Couette flow. This was discussed earlier, the flow between parallel plates. So let me draw the parallel plates for you. So the pressure gradient is 0. So dP dx is 0. This was the x axis at the center line, and there is a y axis here. So this is flow between infinite plates. The upper plate is moving to the right with a speed u, and the lower plate is stationary. And we had worked out the velocity profile. This was the velocity profile. Okay. So what we had found is that Vx was given by this expression u by 2, 1 plus y by b. If b is, so this is y equal to minus b, this is y equal to plus b. So 2b is the distance between the two plates. You get a linear velocity profile, and of course Vy is 0. So therefore, if you draw the streamlines are straight lines, simply because Vy is 0, so you would just get streamlines. And that's the question we are asking. Does this make the flow irrotational just because there are straight streamlines? So one can now calculate what is omega z for this flow, and that's of course given by del Vy by del x minus del Vx by del y. This term goes away, there is no Vy, and this turns out to be minus u over 2b. So if I look at the rotation of the fluid elements, that would be half of omega z, and that would be minus u over 4b. So the expression tells me that the rotation rate is negative, which means it is clockwise. Okay, counterclockwise is positive. So now let us on this diagram try to understand what happens to fluid elements. So if I take a fluid element at a certain time, so let's say I take this fluid element and I ask myself what happens to it after time delta t. So the fluid element convects, and these two edges, they convect with the same speed, but the upper two edges, they convect with a slightly larger speed. So at a later time, this element would look something like this. And if I look after a little bit more time, then I would find that I get this, and this deforms even more. And indeed, this fluid element seems to be rotating. So if you kindly recall that omega z, which is the rotation of, or the rotation rate of the fluid element, is actually the average rotation rate of the two perpendicular edges. So in this example, this very special example, you will find that the lower edge does not rotate simply because of the way I have chosen the element. Okay, it is aligned with the x axis. So this edge just stays aligned with the x axis. but the edge which was initially aligned with the y axis, that rotates, and therefore the average rotation of this element is in the clockwise direction, and in terms of the quantitative analysis, this is what it is. So, is the flow rotational or irrotational? The answer is, of course, this is a rotational flow. Right. So, therefore, rotationality has not much to do with the direction of streamlines. I have shown you an example that I could have straight streamlines and still have a rotational flow, and I could have circular streamlines and still have an irrotational flow. Okay. You can ask similar questions, that what happens inside a boundary layer. So, let us try to argue inside a boundary layer. If you recall from the previous session, we had taken flow past an airfoil. This was the free stream flow, and then we argued that we could decompose this flow into two parts. This here is the inner solution, and the outer one is outside this layer. Here the flow is highly viscous, and here the flow is inviscid. Okay. If I look at a typical velocity profile, let us say at this point, the profile would look something like this. And as you can guess from the example of the plane Couette flow, inside the boundary layer I definitely have a rotational flow. Okay. So, this inside the viscous boundary layer I would have a rotational flow. However, the outer flow being inviscid, it could be a rotational flow or it could be an irrotational flow, and the argument we are making is, if this flow is irrotational in addition to being inviscid, then we should be able to simplify our analysis. Okay, and that's the whole case that we are building. So, I hope now the analysis, the way we are going to do the analysis is going to be clear, that when we are interested in solving a viscous flow for, let us say, an airfoil at a large Reynolds number, then this region is extremely thin. We saw in one of the sessions, it could be simply of the order of a millimeter if the chord of the wing is about 5 meters. We saw that for the example of a flow over a wing of a Airbus A320. So, if we can show that the outer flow is inviscid, we will have a simpler analysis for that, and we are going to use the boundary layer for the inner solutions. Okay. So, one last thing before we move on with the analysis, and that is, can I say that all viscous flows are rotational? So, maybe I should put a question: are all viscous flows rotational? And I can give you a counter example. What if I had a uniform flow? So, I could have a uniform viscous flow. Okay, so, there is a breeze and there are velocity vectors aligned to each other, and it is a uniform breeze everywhere, and there is no gradient in the flow, and you can then argue that there would be no rotation because omega you can actually calculate would be 0. So, you could have a situation where the flow is viscous and it is irrotational, versus if I go inside the boundary layer, again the viscous effects are very important, but this would be a rotational flow. So, one has to be very careful. On the other hand, I could have inviscid flows, and I could ask, are inviscid flows always irrotational? And we have just looked at some examples. So, I gave you the example of a forced vortex and a free vortex, and they both could be in the context of an inviscid flow. So, viscosity is 0. So, an inviscid flow, which is a free vortex flow, is an irrotational flow. On the other hand, an inviscid flow with a forced vortex is a rotational flow. Okay, so, I hope the concept of rotationality is now clear to you.